Well, hello everyone, and we're here with the Conservative Leadership Foundation and having a few discussions over the next few weeks. My name is Leith Coghlin. I'm part of the Executive Committee of the Conservative Leadership Foundation, here with John Capobianco, the founder, one of the patrons of this movement to train conservative-oriented Canadians in how to organize, strategize, and win campaigns, whether it's municipally, provincially, or federally, about how to make sure that good quality conservative activists and leaders can become public office holders. So John, you've been involved since time immemorial.
Pretty much.
What was your first campaign? What prompted you to say, you know what, I see the state of affairs, I see who's on offer, and you know what, I'm going to step up and actually do something to affect the outcome? What was that for you?
Yeah, no, great question. And first, let me start off, Leith, by saying how it's an honor to be sitting across from you and being interviewed by you, because I have been a big fan and we've known each other for a long time. And I think that when you joined the CLF many years ago, and now elevated to being on the board and executive status, it's elevated the CLF to a whole new level. I'm glad for that, and I'm also congratulating you for that as well, because you've made us better.
That was a paid production from Endpoint Public Affairs right there. But so when was it? What was the step-off point for you?
I got involved in politics in university. I went to York University, which is not known as a right-wing university.
And we won't hold that.
Thank you so much. And I got involved with the campus organization. So you can imagine when you're 20 years old in a campus club and you're getting involved in politics for the first time, and you're sitting across Marxist-Leninists and you're sitting across the Communist Party, and you as conservatives are fighting the cause, and you're with a band of folks that you call family and you're having this debate. That charged me up. That's what got me the bug, and I started...
And I tremble to ask you, but what year was that?
Oh, that would have been...
Like, what election cycle was that?
That would have been before Brian Mulroney's...
There was 79, 80
No,
Joe Clark,
84, before
84?
before
Okay.
the big majority government and the back-to-back. I got involved in my local riding association, and my MP at the time was Patrick Boyer,
Oh, yes.
who eventually ran for leadership
Etobicoke
back
Lakeshore.
to Etobicoke Lakeshore. So I got involved with him and his campaign, and then I became his writing president, and then from there got involved in politics in a different level. And that's where I really got started. But I remember how the CLF came about, and that was one of the things that I did, Leith, when I was involved with Patrick Boyer's campaign, still very much in my 20s and in youth politics, and still involved with the campus club, was that being involved with the youth and seeing how the youth were organizing themselves and getting involved, but really being policy oriented and wanting to be involved, but not knowing how to do that, because there was a youth association and there was a senior association, much like my Italian family dinners where the kids table and there was the grown-ups table. And a lot of the kids at the time, youth at the time, me included, said, I want to be at that table. How do I get to that table? So fast forward to 1990, I ran for OPCOIA the executive. I was the 9th vice president. And in 1990, after that year, I actually became president of OPCOIA. And to John McTishan's credit, he was one of my key supporters at the time. He's still older than me, was older than me at the time, but he was still involved.
I love that you added that.
John and I, when we were running for the presidency, we looked at it and said, we got to train youth. We got to make sure that there's a farm team of kids that are prepared for the next level of campaigning, also the next level of politics, if they want to be campaign managers, staffers, whatever. Then at the time, there was only one organization, the Federal Conservative Party, used to have a National Leadership Institute that they would have every second or third year. But only so many youth were invited to that. So it was up to your local MP to appoint 1 or 2 youth to be able to go and attend this. So, if you were one of the 2, you'd love it because you'd be there and you'd come back and it'd be training you, all sorts of things. We said, we want to make sure that every youth in Ontario has a chance to go to one of these leadership things. So we created...
the army.
Correct. We considered it, and we called it the Conservative Leadership Foundation. And that's how it was started.
But that was contrasted with the 85, 87 provincial campaigns, which were very different in terms of their outcomes.
Plus all the leadership campaigns.
And all the leadership, all the leadership campaigns in between those. And they all had it was a dichotomous relationship over those years, where federally it was success after success, provincially it was challenge after challenge, right? So you get to the late 80s, 88, 89, lots of federal success, a lot of internships, youth going to Ottawa to learn from, frankly, some of the best conservative partisans that frankly ever had, and that trained me, inspired you, and that you were lucky enough because you were of a certain vintage to be able to work with at that time. But I was too young and later learned from them under the Harris government provincially. But you're getting to the late 80s, 90s, yourself, John McEtitian, Alistair Campbell, others said, Tony Clement, Leslie Noble, and Betty Stevenson, who had been the provincial treasurer, all sat there and went, how can we translate this into something else? How can we, we don't just want to win a few times, we want to win every time. So there was a meeting of the minds. So the late 80s, everybody said, we've done a terrific job in terms of taking the 80s, as Jean Charest said at the funeral of Brian Mulroney only 2 years ago, that he took a decade and made it his own. And that was true. But there was a lot of success, and now you had a lot of conservatives. How do we make that permanent? So everybody got together, 1989, and said, how do we do this? Walk us through that.
Yeah, and it was a combination of things too. So everything you just said, Leith, absolutely true. And it was one of those issues where, again, because we've had youth associations, and back then, you got to remember, youth associations were powerful because it was a delegated system for leadership, and youth had a huge amount of votes and a lot of influence.
I went to Western, and in the 1980s, there were 10,000 out of 35,000 students at Western that were members of the PC Campus Association at the University of Western Ontario. Applauded for Western. Carry on, Mr. Capobianco.
Very much, and it's good to know that you're from Western, because Western was the one, I think, the one campus that didn't vote for president. All of the delegates but one, I think, did support me for president, which I ended up winning. But no, I think that back then, and again, my convention as an example, in 1990 when I became the president of OPCYA, and that was a robust organization, and the campus organization at the time equally robust as well. But my convention, I think, had about 500 to 600 delegates at it, because I remember winning over my opponent 300 to 150 votes or something. It was quite something. So understand that both at the federal level with their youth associations, the provincial level with our youth associations, both campus and youth in regular, the youth were incredibly powerful. So we needed to channel that energy, and coming up with our own training foundation, our own training organization that allowed for everybody that wanted to be part of it, And not only this, from our first weekend where we trained everybody, we would test everybody at the time. We would have tests for everybody to see where their political acumen is. Some might be way smarter, way more theoretical about politics than others. So we would put them in various tiers so that we can help them along. So the first stage was academic. And then we would have training. We'd have trivia nights, understanding where we'd have team building where everybody would form their own teams, come up with their own names, their own banners. And then it would be door knocking and how to stop somebody from being caught up at a door, how to canvass properly, how to do a speech, how to debate. And it was a weekend of that level of intensity, very little sleep. It was all basically a work. And then we would have final exams, and then we would give out awards. And people would have certificates. And I know to this day, some people still have those certificates framed. They say that they graduated from CLF. And that survived a number of years, and I would say a couple of decades as well. And it's waned from there, but also youth politics has waned as well, Leith.
Well, it has changed a lot. So we get to 1990 when CLF was founded, and there was a view that we had to create an institution for conservatives to learn and understand how to win, right? So 1990 was a pretty desolate year for conservatives at both levels, because the National Conservative Coalition was fragmenting or beginning to fragment at that time with the breakup of Meech Lake. So Western conservatives were beginning to organize. Quebec conservatives were also rethinking their allegiances. And then provincially, 3 years where the conservative movement in Ontario, despite having led for 42 years and only been out of office 5 years, had no money. Very few people still motivated to be involved at that time, but those that were very committed and very true. And then you said, okay, we still have to make this work, and we still have to advance a conservative point of view. So what are we going to do? So you created CLF, you created an incubator to train people. And so you talked about door knocking, issues management, how to deal with the media, how to compel and persuade people to come to your viewpoint through understanding and listening and dialogue and all of those other things. And so over the next 30 years, there's been a pretty different track record of success. And usually, and I think you'll agree with me on this, every single time there was emphasis placed on CLF by the movement, not necessarily the parties, but just the movement in general. Whenever movement was placed on CLF, we won. So here we are, 2026. The Conservative Party nationally has been out of power for 11 years now. Provincially, we've been in power for the past, what is it now, 8 years. 8 years. It would underscore that training and building an army of people who understand the mechanics, understand how to make the appeal, understand how to raise money, understand how to form a team would matter more than ever in an era which, unlike in 1990, is not 24/7, is not the information age. So why is it important now more than ever that we take conservative-minded activists and teach them all these core skills to win? Why is that more important now than ever? And I know you can take that in a million different directions, but what does that mean for you with your multi-decade experience now of why that matters and how it's effective?
Because having seen the evolution of CLF and having seen the evolution of its progress and knowing the people that we have trained back in 1990 through the decades, and some of the folks that not only taught the various sessions that I talked about, but even the kids that were there that were learning and how they've become chiefs of staff, how some of them have actually run for office and become leading or various organizations and working in the GR departments. Some of them are elected officials. It shows that being able to be trained and being able to have some level of experience in something. There's nothing in university that teaches you this, teaches you the practical way of campaigning.
Or even business,
for that matter. They can talk to you about theoretical and this is how campaigns work, but to be able to, as an 18-year-old, to knock on a door and experience that level of thing when you're not in the real world, an election campaign, but you're in a setting where you're wanting to learn, that's second to none. So my thing is seeing that evolve and seeing those people do well and evolve in the course of the last little while, I think is what kept the CLF going. And we at Leith, for a purpose, did not align with any, we called ourselves Conservative Leadership Foundation because we only wanted to train conservatives, small c conservatives. But we also didn't want to be aligned with the federal Conservative Party or the provincial Conservative Party, right? They both were supportive. They both always knew what we were doing and were always told when our events were, and often quite helped us send kids and students to the various weekends. But we did it on purpose because we wanted to have some level of autonomy to be able to do it and help them in a way that wasn't prescribed because we were associated with them in one way or another.
Assigned to leadership.
Right. But to your question more specifically, though, I think why now and what's happened now? Because both associations, both the federal conservatives and the provincial conservatives, have really no longer a youth association or one of any of validity. I think the Ontario one still has one, that's the OPCOIA and the campus have merged into one, but not to the power and the level that we had it back in the day. And it's because we've got one member, one vote. So now the power of leaderships and all that stuff, where it was probably more described to be youth having more vote, more weighted in some of those, has gone. And also I think a lot of the youth have been assimilated into the senior ranks. I'm a president of the Provincial Riding Association in my riding, Wetobigo Lakeshore, and we've got 2 or 3 young folks that are members of our senior executive. We don't have a youth association anymore. Right. So the need to try to get that level of farm team or that group of people that ought to be trained and needed so that when the government does happen, when we do form government federally, and the ministers in Ottawa are saying, boy, I'd love to get some staff, or where can we draw from? Because I remember they were drawing from the CLF in a number of ways to say, hey, these guys went through this training, they got a little bit more understanding of what's going on.
The political, and they also have
their own education.
They also
the practical side.
Understand politics and how that works.
Yeah, that's missing. And I think that's why the value of the CLF continues to this day and ought to continue, not only for the young people, but also for those of all generations, because now we've morphed into what we call lessons learned. Yeah. A lot of our sessions, because you've run a lot of them, are about, okay, so we've taken a couple of campaigns that have happened, a couple of leadership campaigns. What are lessons learned, good, bad, and indifferent? And we bring the players that were involved in the election campaign, in the leadership campaigns, on panels to talk candidly about this is what worked, this is what didn't work, this is why we won, this is why we lost. Opportunity.
To amplify what bred success,
Correct.
to correct what diverted attention
So
and
we never
potentially,
lose again.
yeah, so we don't lose.
Right.
And again, it's the whole thing. To be successful, you have to build the infrastructure to
Yes.
be successful.
Yes.
And the CLF is that infrastructure to be able to provide that winning vehicle.
Yeah.
So let's get a little more granular.
Yeah.
Let's do something that political dorks like you and me absolutely love, which is looking at all the facets of campaigns. And even over the past 15, 16 years, it's changed so much. Back in 1984, when you were inclined to do your first campaign, you were talking about phone banks
Yes.
and
Envelope stuffing.
something that we don't even contemplate these days, which are literature drops, where you didn't even compel these massive teams that would go out and just stuff mailboxes with literature that you hoped people would read.
Right.
Because volunteers were that plentiful back then, where you could literally say, go into this neighborhood and drop a whole bunch of literature, which we can't possibly contemplate today. We need them actually to knock on doors if they're going to do that. Let's break down a campaign bit by bit, and then maybe talk to me about how CLF said we need to take the concept and then turn it into a teachable point of view. So let's break it down. Let's start with, how do you motivate and bring people in?
Yeah. Today, harder than ever. I ran for offices for the federal Conservatives under Stephen Harper back in 2004 and 2006, when the Conservative Party that we know today was first merged and formed. In 2004, I put my name forward and ran. And at that point, we probably had in my riding about 400 to 500 volunteers. Right. The next time I ran, and that's why I'll get to the point about today, in 2006 when I ran again, that time is when the Liberals parachuted Michael Ignatieff into my riding. So my riding became a focal point of attention because he was the messiah for the Liberals.
It was the leading riding.
And not only that, but got international media because of him. But it became a focal point. And to Stephen Harper's credit, he came in my riding twice. We only lost by about 3 or 4 percentage points. It was close, and they were worried because they ended up closing up all of the other campaigns to put resources to make sure he won. That campaign, I think we sent out 600 volunteer thank you letters. Nowadays, so that was 2004, 2006. Nowadays, I worked in, my most recent campaign was Christine Hogarth's election in provincially in the last election campaign here. And we were paying volunteers, and we were trying to get Queen's Park staffers who were on leave of absence for the campaign to come in and help out various campaigns and stuff. It was hard, and not just our riding, across the board, Leith, you know this because you ran campaigns, to get volunteers. So now ridings put budgets aside volunteers. In the span of 20 plus years, we've gone from ridings, and I wasn't the only one back in the day. Every riding had multiple hundreds of volunteers in their ridings. But we went from that to now having to pay for volunteers. So something happened in the 20 years, right, where people are not as engaged in politics, they're apathetic about it. And when you get volunteers, God bless them when they come in, they don't know what they're doing, so you have to train them, right? And that's fine, because every riding has trainers, and they have to train how to door knock and what to do and what to expect if somebody decides to yell at you at the door and that kind of stuff. And that's got to change. So I think, if anything, there's got to be a rebirth of having people understand the value of that level of volunteering. Because as you said, Leith, back when I ran, we had people that were stuffing envelopes. There were people that were doing phone banks. They were doing literature drops. And nowadays, you've got companies that will do all of that for you. And that's, in some cases, good. But you lose that volunteer. And the volunteers are your workhorses because they're the ones that will motivate you. They're the ones that will spread the word to their 10 friends or 100 friends when they go home at night and say, I knocked on the door for John Capobianco, and I'll tell you, great guy. That doesn't happen when you have no volunteers.
One of the things that I've really loved about the CLF over the past 36 years is how it's graduated with time. Yeah. It's the old saying of you change with the times or the times change you. And one of the things that I've always adored about the CLF is we look retrospectively on the last, we do lessons learned, and then we say, how does that influence how we teach and mentor and coach people going further? Now it's become even broader because initially CLF was primarily around youth,
Yeah.
but CLF has now graduated where it's not just youth, we're also going after young professionals, we're going after retirees, we're going after any span of people who agree that putting conservatives at the federal, the provincial, the local level matters. So we want to understand what are the tactics and techniques that can get them into those positions.
Yes.
How, because we've talked a lot about youth, but if you're a member of a chamber of commerce, if you're a member of a young professionals association, if you're a member of a citizen group, whether it's a ratepayers association, whether it's a seniors association, how, if you are 21 to 71, is CLF relevant for you?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I got to give credit to John McAtischen, our dear friend.
Yes.
I would say a credit to John McAtischen, because when he and I founded this back in the 1990, it was for youth, right? It was for making sure that there was an inclusive organization that could train youth, and it went on multiple years. Like any organization, it had ebbs and flows. There were times when we were dormant and there was issues, and times when we came back and stuff. But John's persistence, because obviously I got busy with work and other stuff, and John wanted to keep the CLF
in the way.
And for me, it did, right? And for John, as much as it did for him as well, but for John, he knew that the CLF was a critical point for him. And what he did, when he realized that the youth movement wasn't as strong as it was before, he morphed the CLF into what is now what I said, Leith, and what you've been involved in, is this training and more of a lesson learned, but an opportunity for any conservative of any age to attend and learn from experts on what to do, what not to do, how they can get involved. And the other thing that John did that I give him full credit for was bringing a board together and organizing a bit more of a structure to it, and bringing in people like you and Connor and others, Jacob, Tamara Cronus, who's now an engineer, Stuart, all these folks who are phenomenal, people that have been so active and involved in creating the CLF that it is today, which is full of one-day seminars that talk about experts and talk about how best to distill and share information and have a proper discussion, constructive discussion on conservative politics and campaigns and leaderships. And that's what's going on today.
And so if we look on a forward basis, because conservatives, not so much provincially, because there's been a provincial trend towards conservative government, because we're 8 years deep, and by 2019, 11 years in government. But federally, there's been a bigger challenge over the past 11 years. What do you think would benefit the conservative movement through CLF to help change that dynamic? Training, it's obvious.
Yeah.
We train an army, we build an army, they go out, we win. But maybe the question is more, how do we attract people in to say, listen, if you agree with this point of view, if you think that we're going to set the conditions and go out and win so that our point of view can prevail, and then be in the position to make the decisions that bring the change we want to see.
Yeah.
In this environment, 2026, John Capobianco, give us, what is the recipe now for CLF to bring people in to know, if you give up a weekend, if you give up a series of weeks to participate in this training, what is the value add in doing that? How do you sell that?
I would say there's no other organization that will give you the hard truth, real and timely information and education anywhere else, because parties will have their postmortems and other organizations might have their postmortems and what have you, but the CLF will have the actual people that were involved in the various campaigns and the various leaderships talking about the real issues and talking about the reality of what happened on those campaigns. And more importantly, people are allowed to ask real questions and they will get real answers. So if you want to be able to know and understand and become better at what you want to do, or just you're fascinated by politics, you want to know what happened and what transpired, there's no better organization than CLF that will get that done. And I assure you that once you do, and the last one that we did, it was in May, if I'm not mistaken, right? The lesson learned one, where we had
There's both federal and
provincial players there. Yeah, and it was an incredible opportunity for them to learn from campaign managers, from winning campaigns and losing campaigns, and media people that covered the actual election campaigns, talking about what they saw, what they didn't see. Where else are you going to get that kind of thing? And it's a tribute to the work that you guys all do, you and Connor and Jacob and others, but also the fact that we still draw incredibly talented people that were running campaigns that want to be able to teach at the CLF. That's why it's an incredible tool, an incredible institution, and why it'll continue for another many years.
Right. Let's switch gears. Much as my DNA is programmed against fun, let's talk about some fun things. Give us an anecdote from a particular campaign where you were encountering some measure of difficulty or challenge in the campaign. And just like we train soldiers in the Army to, if you don't know, fall back on the doctrine, fall back on what you've been trained to do. And if you follow that doctrine train, you will probably end up better than the people fighting against you. Give me an example from your myriad of, dare I say, a half century almost of campaigning, where you were in a situation, a campaign, and initially when you were presented with a problem, you went, I don't know, from a gut instinct how to solve this, but I'm going to think of everything that I've been taught, all the wisdom that I've been given from CLF and other luminaries, and I'm going to marinate on that for a little bit. And then, if nothing else, I'm going to try it and see if it works. And you did, and it worked. Maybe give an example of that.
Though, Leith, it'll probably be on my own campaign, because I've seen a lot in various campaigns that I've been a volunteer at and helped out. But in my own campaign in 2004, my first time running, and it was 2004, so it was after many years of CLFs and doing the training and being part of it and watching the training being done. But I remember Stephen Harper became our leader. And if you recall, I was part of the Unite the Right movement. I was a legacy progressive conservative that left to become part of the Unite the Right movement, the Canadian Alliance, which I was.
Not an easy thing.
And I was on the founding board of the Canadian Alliance. And then when the parties merged and it became the Conservative Party, I did the right thing by putting my name forward. So here I am, Stephen Harper, new leader, new party, and we're knocking on doors in 2004. And one of the first doors I come across, I remember this person, it was a couple, an elderly couple, who basically said, John Capobianco, who are you and why are you here? And I said, I'm running for the Conservative Party of Canada. And they said, is Stephen Harper your leader? I said, yes, in fact he is, and I'm proud to be running for him. You are a fascist. You get off my property. Stephen Harper is from Alberta. He doesn't have a clue. He is a blah, blah, blah. And just these expletives coming down. And again, at that point, I would have been in my 30s. And to get that at one of your first couple of doors, that level of vitriol, and it was my natural impulse was to say, shut the F up. I'm proud. But what I did was I realized that I was going to get their vote. And CLF trained me and trained others to say, if you ever come across either a violent door or a door that just keeps you there for the sake of keeping you there, because your job as a candidate is to knock and identify as many votes as you possibly can every given day. I thought to myself, no, I'm not going to get involved in this argument. They've obviously know what their mind is. I know that I'm not going to convince them of it, other than to say, ma'am, you're wrong. You should read the real news and not the fake news and learn about Stephen Harper and the Conservative Party. And I took my way and I went off. So that was just one small example, though, Leith, of how as a young candidate, and I've seen that happen where volunteers have come to campaign offices crying, saying that they were told to get off my property, you are a fascist and all this kind of stuff. So we tell them, don't ever take that personally, and know that when that happens, just say thank you, don't provoke it, walk away, go to the next door. So that was one of the things. But that's just one of small little things that...
Right. So that was in voter identification and persuasion, yeah. So let's move to another one. Maybe talk about fundraising and what are some of the key tactics that CLF sort of implanted in you to understand how we do that. And from a long background in sales in my professional life, one of the key concepts that's brought about in sales is never make any assumptions on the person with the money. You always just have to ask, right? CLF understands that, and CLF has a pretty rigorous program about how you raise and make the appeal on fundraising. So let's explore that for a second. Let's talk about fundraising. So what are some of the lessons learned from CLF that then translated into real reality for you on the fundraising side?
Yeah. I would say that you're never going to get money if you don't ask. And you're going to get told no. And it's the law of averages. You're going to ask 10 people and 8 of them will say no, but the 2 that say yes is what you build on. So know that you're never going to get a yes every time you ask for money. Also know that the candidate is the best person to ask for money. If you're ever canvassing a candidate, or if a candidate comes to you in any capacity and says, hey, I want to run for office, because a lot of us are in search committees and our job is to filter potential candidates. The first question I ask is, are you comfortable fundraising? Are you comfortable asking your family members for money? I remember when I ran in 2004, and Mark Spiro was my campaign manager at the time, a phenomenal guy who's now quite successful. I remember he said to me, the first people you're going to ask for your money is your family. The second people you're going to ask for money is your second family, like your relatives. It's your close friends, your close family, your relatives, and then everybody else. Because if they're not going to give you money,
The indication of what your problem
so ask, don't be afraid to ask. And also I would say that, and be persistent about it. The reason why, and you get these as well, I remember during the campaigns how many people will call with, John, if the party would stop calling me, I'm getting these calls about money, fundraising for money, and they've got these calls that are happening on a regular basis. And I said, the reason why they do it is because it's successful.
They're going to contact 10,000 people.
Law of averages. They're going to get they're going to get that, and they're going to raise the money. So yeah, they're going to maybe tick off a few people, but by and large, the vast majority will give money. So ask often. Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask if you're a candidate, and ask family members, because if your family won't give you money, then why are you going to ask a stranger for it?
Let's pivot and graduate on that a little bit more. So we've talked about organizing people, we've talked about fundraising, then let's talk about communications. And it's changed quite a lot from 1990 and the beginning of CLF, because local constituency, I think we call them electoral district associations, which drives me nuts. I still call them ridings or constituencies because that's better fitting to our system as opposed to EDAs, which is a very American kind of congressional district appellation. Since 1990, local campaigns had a little more autonomy than they do now. And one of the things that is often said in national or provincial campaigns of, what is the message? How are we going to persuade? Not your problem if you are local. All you need to do is go out, identify votes, et cetera, et cetera. But situations exist where you still will have to persuade people, and particularly the conservative world, on the business side, on professionals, and so on and so forth. Local autonomy on campaigns has changed a little bit over time. And how would you say the CLF has taken that understanding and then turned it into something that can be helpful for local campaigns with those change dynamics, where you don't have as much autonomy because of smartphones and social media, where a national message will get picked up faster than if you say something locally? So maybe expand on that, or take it wherever you want to go.
Yeah, I would say, I think back in the day even when I ran, local riding associations did have a huge amount of power and influence in the way it goes, only because I think parties now have become so much more sophisticated. And parties and party headquarters and party campaign teams have become so much more intelligent and are able to really do things in a way that they couldn't have been done 30, 40 years ago or 20 years ago. So I would say that a lot of campaign teams, and centralized campaign teams in some ways, have more resources to bear that riding associations don't have this time around, whereas in the past they relied on riding associations far more from that perspective. And I think the CLF has always been able to say, look, riding associations are valuable. We've always told people, if you want to get involved, the first level to get involved is at the local riding association level. Because by the time if you get elected to the riding association and you're on there, then you've got a responsibility. And your one responsibility is to elect a conservative member of provincial parliament or federal parliament in your local riding. And you do whatever you can in the 4 years between elections to do either re-elect them or to get them elected. And you learn a lot of things and you get a lot of understanding. But now with social media, with all sorts of things happening on the sides. You can't rely just on the local riding association to be able to do the proper vetting of candidates and the proper campaign teachings and training of volunteers. You need a broader organization, which is central campaigns, to actually get involved and help as much as you can, which is what happens now.
Digitization has grown so exponentially. It's going back to the 2012 presidential race in the United States with Barack Obama, who was simply because they had the resources and the funding to be able to explore and exploit that in the way that they did. But 2012 is a jump off point where social media, influencing, and so on and so forth became a must-have in campaigns. That's really when it started, was 14 years ago in 2012. The American campaign set the standard, and kind of in the Western world, everybody followed after that. There's a lot made of that. We hear a lot of people who, I think, at least in my own professional experience, there are a lot of entities that compare e-commerce and other online engagements as equivalent to what you can do politically. Whereas I think the CLF has done a very good job of saying winning the election and waging the effort is all about a multi-dimensional, multi-plane effort where you incorporate all of these things and synchronize them so they give you the result that they want. But on the digital side, what would you say CLF is doing to say there's got to be a lot of focus on digital online influence, but only a part of the global ecosystem that influences the result? So what would you say to that?
I would say, and it's not a long answer in a sense, only because the fact that digitalization, social media, and how it's infiltrated campaigns, both locally and centrally, has only gone exponentially, in some cases worse, in some cases good. And I think the CLF has always been on top of making sure that it's always been part of the training opportunities that we've had. Because of course, when we were first starting off, nobody knew about social media, right? The only media was either the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, or the odd radio station. But nowadays, it so permeates every campaign, and it influences campaigns to the better and to the good if it's managed right or if it's managed wrong. And I think the CLF is one where we bring in experts that not only have done it for campaigns, but have run digital campaigns, but also have managed them in a way that has worked. So I would say that we've been on top of it. We continue to be on top of it. It's one where it's going to continually evolve and it's going to get even worse. And now with this foreign interference stuff that we're hearing about, it becomes even more prevalent to make sure that we're on top of it. So thank you.
So if we sum up here and we talk about the value, being a Conservative in Canada and Ontario is not easy all the time. We have to work for our election results, which is a healthy thing. Yeah. We have to convince and persuade people that we can be entrusted as Conservatives to manage the public till, to bring about legislation or to revoke bad legislation and fix the reality. When you think, and I think you can probably look to the multiple generation of CLF graduates that have gone on to do the right things and make the corrections and to introduce the right things and to recalibrate everything. At the end of the day, what is CLF for you?
It's a great question. And I would say for me, it's something that I'm extremely proud of by way of what we were able to accomplish and coming up with the CLF in 1990, and it's still being talked about and revered, and in some cases folks have come and gone with the CLF. But knowing the people that I know that have either been taught or taught at the CLF over many years and where they're at now, being mayors, ministers, MPs, chiefs of staff, corporate leaders, all that stuff, it just shows the value and the need for organizations like the CLF and for an organization like the CLF to continue doing what it's doing. And again, we've evolved from weekend training sessions to one-day seminars and one-day lesson learned opportunities. Discussions, COVID as well, but also more importantly, the need for people to want to know that if there's a place that they can go and be safe and know that they can just talk honestly and candidly about conservative politics, they've got a home in the CLF. And it's going to be, and people like you, Leith, that continue to work it and Connor and Jacob and others on the board and others that have done good work.
And
I just
all of
wish
our
them well.
federal MPs that are CLF graduates, our
Provincial as well. They've
MPs,
supported us over the years.
municipal public
Yeah.
office holders that
Yes.
all went through the CLF
Yeah, yeah.
program. Yeah.
So I'm happy for that. I'm proud of it. And again, I give a lot of credit to John McAtishan, who is with us and has been one of the biggest champions of it and has kept it going for as long as we can, and we'll continue to do so.
Right. So 36 years later, multiple wins locally, provincially, nationally. The CLF is worth doing. And John, for you and all of your generation that said, you know what, we need to create a center of excellence that we can pass our wisdom and our experience to, see it evolve over time so that Conservatives win, no matter the circumstance. That is a great and fundamental thing. And so as a CLF alumnus myself, and
an executive member now.
It never would have happened without you, without John, without so many luminaries and patrons and thought leaders in the Conservative movement. We just need to make it bigger and better and to run from Vancouver Island
Yes.
up to Nunavut, down and across all of central Canada through the Maritimes and right up and through Labrador.
Yeah.
So that thoughtful, powerful listeners, empathetic, careful people are in the position to make the decisions and take the heat where necessary.
Yeah.
Not to think to the next election, but to think to the next generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for all of you that took that decision in 1988-89 to say, we're going to do CLF in 1990, and 36 years later, it still exists, that's a group of people that don't think about just the next election. That's a group of people that thinks about the next generation. And that's statesmanship. So John, this is me saying thank you for being one of those statesmen. And
Thanks, Lee.
for everybody that is interested, wants to do CLF, wants to understand a little bit more, there is a long list of people that are willing to talk about it, willing to bring you in, willing to build on any of your questions so that we can build the army that goes out and fights the battle and prevails. So for everybody at the Conservative Leadership Foundation, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for looking at either our entire discussion today or excerpts of it. And John Capobianco, one of our luminary extraordinaires, thank you so much for giving your time today so that we can take a look down memory lane and also talk about what's ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leith.
And on behalf of the Conservative Leadership Foundation, thank you so much.